Going from America to Asia or Asia to Europe, you'll most likely have to transit through the Middle East. Even going from Africa to Asia, sometimes you'd still be transiting through the Gulf region, making this region one of the largest flight transit hubs in the world. This is the space Ethiopia plans to play in and hopefully dominate. They plan to achieve this with two strategies. First, upgrade and expand the current airport, and second, build an even larger airport with over 4 times the current airport's capacity. The new Ethiopian airport is planned to have 4 runways. Let that sink in for a moment. You see, most international airports in Europe have 2 runways, and some really big airports have 3. Ethiopia plans on launching 4 runways. Why? The funny thing is, why this is possible is because in the past couple decades, Ethiopian Airlines has consistently hit all of its predicted targets by at least 5 years ahead of schedule in some cases, from Vision 2010 to Vision 2025. And it was one of the few profitable airlines during the COVID lockdown. How did they achieve it, you ask? And what are their plans to chip at the shares of the Middle East's airline profit? We'll answer that in this video. You see, Ethiopia is strategically positioned around the Horn of Africa, meaning it's closer to Asia, and the flight distance from Ethiopia to Europe is almost close to that of Ethiopia to South Africa, whereas the distance between Ethiopia to Southeast Asia is almost close to that of Ethiopia to the Gambia. And the country sits on top of the equator and almost in the center of the transit zones from America to Far East Asia. All of these are advantages the region has, and the country is well aware of it. That's why they're investing over $12 billion into a new airport while simultaneously upgrading their existing one. Their current airport, the Addis Ababa Bole International Airport, is reaching its limits. The government and Ethiopian Airlines now believe that the only way to support the next stage of growth is to build a completely new airport outside the capital. The project, planned near the town of Bishoftu, is expected to become one of the largest airports in the world when fully completed. This airport is positioned to make Ethiopia the crossroads of the aviation world. You see, for a long time, to move from one African country to another, you'd have to use foreign flights, either British Airlines or another such service. And a few decades ago, and in very rare cases, when traveling from one African country to another, you'd have to lay over at a European nation before heading to your African country of choice. Can you imagine that? This reason pushed Ethiopia to invest heavily in an airline, moving Africans from one part of the continent to another. Africa is home to 1.4 billion people, and this number is set to double to almost 3 billion by 2050. Ethiopia knows this and is strategically positioning itself to handle this growing traffic. While the airlines in the Middle East aim to connect the world through the Gulf region as a transit zone, Ethiopia, taking a leaf from their playbook, aims to connect Africa not just to each other, but to the world, and in reverse, connect the world to Africa. This means if you plan to visit, work, or connect with Africa, you'd have to move through Ethiopia. All of this has caused a growing foot traffic through the current airport, which was built to handle around 25 million annual passengers, a volume that the airport is quickly surpassing. Let's give you a brief history for a moment. You see, Ethiopian Airlines was founded by Haile Selassie in December 1945 and began flights in April 1946, with its first flight to Cairo. It was set up with help from Trans World Airlines, which trained staff and managed early operations. The airline started with 5 C-47 aircraft supplied by the US after World War II. From the start, it was set up as a joint venture with TWA. Eventually, Ethiopia kept ownership and focused on building local skills. Over time, foreign experts were replaced with Ethiopian workers, while profits were reinvested into expanding routes, buying more planes, and developing maintenance capacity, helping the airline grow steadily. Ethiopian Airlines began formal training early, opening its aviation academy in 1956 to build local skills across flying, maintenance, and operations. They entered the jet age in 1962 when it introduced the Boeing 720B, becoming one of the first African carriers to operate jet aircraft. Not long after, in 1964, it established Africa's first dedicated pilot training school, allowing Ethiopians to train as pilots at home instead of relying on foreign programs, eventually exporting their pilots to other countries. This move came at a time when much of Africa had very limited aviation infrastructure, so it gave Ethiopia a major advantage by producing its own pilots, engineers, and technicians, and laid the foundation for the airline's long-term growth. By 1970, the airline expanded into long-haul, intercontinental flights, launching services beyond Africa and the Middle East into Europe, marking its full transition into a global airline. Ethiopia also did something not many African countries could achieve at the time. Other countries struggled and eventually folded, like Nigerian Airways, while South African Airways, Kenya Airways, and Air Zimbabwe all struggled to stay afloat or turn a profit. But Ethiopia kept flying. Why is this? Because the government owned the airways completely. Ethiopia didn't have many resources it could turn to, and being landlocked meant it wasn't connected to the sea and couldn't depend on port profits. So the country had to turn inwards and build something unique to itself to help boost the local economy. It identified a problem, which was the lack of an intracontinental airlines to serve Africa, and it provided that solution in Ethiopian Airlines. Another reason it was very successful is that it hired foreigners to run the airlines in the early days because they were professionals and had the skills, something the locals lacked. And these foreign contractors trained the locals in the decades that followed, slowly handing over management to the locals as their skills became matched. By 2005, as successful as the airline was, it was still the fourth largest airlines in Africa, behind South Africa, Egypt, and Kenya. This wasn't enough for Ethiopia, so they wrote a plan called Vision 2010, with the aim to grow passenger volume, grow revenue, and grow capacity. The plan was all interconnected. To grow passenger volume, they'd have to connect to more countries and advertise more. As the passenger volume grew, the revenue followed, and then human and cargo capacity inadvertently grew too. The country went to work with obsession and dedication. Each successful administration never deviated from this plan because they knew that if it succeeded, so would their GDP. They hired able personnel, meticulously trained staff, improved their maintenance, and applied for more licenses and connected to more regions. By 2009, a full year before the targeted deadline, they'd achieved all their goals. Most people would be pleased with this milestone, but not Ethiopia. They immediately set a new target, one they called Vision 2025, with a plan to grow their fleet to 120 aircrafts and a revenue of $2 billion annually with 57 connecting international destinations. Like the previous target, they went to work with astute dedication and obsession. To meet this deadline, the government invested in training pilots, cargo handlers, maintenance technicians, and other important airline staff. They built maintenance facilities in the country to prevent having to fix their jets abroad, which in turn rewarded them as they became the regional hub for jet repairs and maintenance, which also helped in their revenue. They also established dedicated cargo operations, something that later came in handy and generate a ton of profit during the 2020 pandemic. And they pumped all the profit they made back into the business, improving administration and enhancing operations. All this resulted in them achieving their Vision 2025 goal by 2018. Crazy, right? A full 7 years before the deadline. Now the airline generates close to $8 billion annually, rubbing shoulders with the top global aviation companies. But success like this comes with its own problems. Remember the 25 million annual commuter traffic we spoke of earlier? Well, their current airport can no longer handle the growth and expansion because air traffic in Ethiopia has grown quickly during the last 2 decades. After expanding its route network across Africa and adding many long-distance flights to Europe, Asia, and the Americas, the airline grew, and passenger numbers at Addis Ababa Bole International Airport rose with it. In recent years, the airport has handled close over 20 million passengers annually. Even after expansion work on the terminal a few years ago, the airport is approaching the upper limit of what its facilities can handle comfortably. Terminals, gates, baggage systems, and aircraft parking areas all face pressure during busy periods. Ethiopian Airlines expects passenger numbers to keep rising. The airline's long-term growth plans aim to serve 60 million people annually by 2030 and 110 million by 2045. If those plans succeed, the current airport would reach capacity well before that expansion is complete. A larger airport with far greater passenger capacity is therefore seen as necessary to support the airline's future network. Another problem is location. Addis Ababa Bole International Airport sits within the urban area of Addis Ababa. When the airport was originally built, the surrounding area was far less developed. Over time, the city expanded around it. Today, residential neighborhoods, commercial buildings, and major roads surround the airport. This urban growth restricts how much the airport can expand. Adding new runways, building large additional terminals, or expanding aircraft parking areas would require large-scale demolition and land acquisition. Such expansion would be extremely costly and difficult. Airports that expect major long-term growth often move to sites outside dense city areas where large tracts of land are available. By building a new airport near Bishoftu, Ethiopia gains the space needed for multiple runways, larger terminals, and future expansion without the physical restrictions present in central Addis Ababa. The airport also contributes to traffic congestion in the surrounding districts of the capital. Many passengers, cargo trucks, airport workers, and service vehicles travel to and from the airport each day. Because the airport sits within a dense urban area, these trips add pressure to the road network. Moving the primary airport outside the central city could reduce some of this congestion. New highways and transport links planned for the new airport can be designed from the start to handle large traffic volumes. This allows for better long-term planning of transport infrastructure linked to the airport. One of the most important technical reasons behind the new airport project is altitude. Addis Ababa sits more than 2,000 meters above sea level. The airport therefore operates at a high elevation compared with most major international hubs. High-altitude airports face a basic physical challenge. Air becomes thinner as altitude increases. Aircraft rely on dense air for two key things: lift generated by the wings and thrust produced by the engines. When the air is thinner, both lift and engine performance decrease. Because of this, aircraft departing from high-altitude airports often cannot take off at their maximum possible weight. Pilots and airlines must reduce the weight of the aircraft so that it can safely accelerate and lift off within the available runway distance. Weight reductions can involve several adjustments. Airlines may reduce cargo loads or limit the number of passengers on board, which most airlines wouldn't do because it'll mean reducing their revenue. The final option would be to decrease the amount of fuel carried at departure. For shorter flights, these limits are usually manageable, but for longer flights, this becomes a problem. You see, fuel weight is one of the biggest factors in aircraft performance at high-altitude airports. Long-haul flights require large quantities of fuel. If an aircraft cannot depart with a full fuel load due to weight restrictions, the airline may face a difficult choice. Ethiopian Airlines manages this altitude problem by departing with less fuel, then scheduling a technical refueling stop along the route. This means landing at another airport simply to refuel before continuing to the final destination. Such stops increase travel time and add operational costs. Flights traveling west from Addis Ababa toward North America can be especially affected by this issue. Aircraft flying westbound often face strong headwinds at cruising altitude. These winds increase fuel consumption during the journey. At a high-altitude airport like the Addis Ababa Bole Airport, the aircraft may not be able to depart with enough fuel to complete such long flights. Ethiopia first tried to solve this problem by building longer runways. A longer runway allows aircraft more distance to accelerate before takeoff. Addis Ababa Bole International Airport does have long runways compared with many other airports in the region, but runway length alone cannot fully solve the altitude problem. There is a limit to how much additional runway distance can offset thin air. For an airline that operates many long-distance routes with large aircraft, these limits can become a recurring operational constraint. Reducing or eliminating them would improve efficiency and route flexibility. The new airport will fix all that because it sits at The planned airport near Bishoftu sits at a somewhat lower elevation than Addis Ababa. Even a difference of several hundred meters can improve aircraft performance. Denser air allows engines to produce more thrust and wings to generate more lift. With improved performance, the aircrafts can depart closer to their maximum takeoff weight. This means they can carry more fuel, more cargo, and more passengers. Long-distance flights become easier to operate without refueling stops. For Ethiopian Airlines, which operates long routes to cities in North America, Europe, and Asia, even modest improvements in aircraft performance can translate into significant economic benefits. The growth of Ethiopian Airlines is another major factor behind the airport project. The airline has become the largest and most successful carrier in Africa by fleet size, passenger numbers, and route network. Its strategy relies heavily on the hub system based in Addis Ababa. Passengers from cities across Africa fly to Addis Ababa and connect to flights heading to other continents. At the same time, travelers from Europe, Asia, and the Middle East transfer there to reach destinations across the African continent. This model requires an airport designed to handle large volumes of connecting passengers. Transfer facilities, gate capacity, baggage handling systems, and runway availability must all be able to support waves of arriving and departing flights. Air cargo also plays an important role in Ethiopia's aviation sector. The country exports agricultural products such as flowers, fresh vegetables, and coffee to international markets. Many of these goods require fast air transport to reach customers while still fresh. Ethiopian Airlines Cargo operates a large cargo network linking Africa with Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. As export volumes grow, demand for cargo handling capacity increases as well. A new airport provides an opportunity to build larger and more advanced cargo facilities. Dedicated cargo terminals, storage areas, and logistics centers can support faster handling and larger shipment volumes. The planned airport near Bishoftu is designed to address these constraints while supporting the airline's role as a major intercontinental connector between Africa and the rest of the world.